Sumer was an ancient civilization founded in the Fertile Crescent region of Mesopotamia, situated between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Known for their innovations in language, governance, architecture, and more, the Sumerians are considered the creators of civilization as modern humans understand it. Their control of the region lasted just over 2,000 years before the Babylonians took power in 2004 BC. Welcome to the Myths and Curiosities channel. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any notifications. Sumer, or Land of Civilized Kings, flourished in Mesopotamia, now modern Iraq, around 4500 BC. The Sumerians created an advanced civilization with its own system of elaborate language and writing, architecture and arts, astronomy and mathematics. His religious system was complex, made up of hundreds of gods. According to ancient texts, each Sumerian city was guarded by its own god, and while humans and gods used to live in harmony, humans served the gods. The Sumerian creation myth can be found on a tablet in Nippur, an ancient Mesopotamian city founded in approximately 5000 BCE. Sumerian mythology states that, in the beginning, gods like humans ruled the earth. When they arrived on Earth, there was a lot of work to be done, and these gods worked the soil, digging it up to make it habitable and extracting its minerals. The texts mention that at some point the gods revolted against the work they did. Anu, the god of gods, agreed that the work was too heavy. His son Enki, or Ea, proposed to create a man to bear the work, and so, with the help of his half-sister Ninki, he did so. A god was killed, and his body and blood were mixed with clay. From this material, the first human being was created, in the likeness of the gods. This first man was created in Eden, a Sumerian word meaning flat ground. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Eden is mentioned as the Garden of the Gods and is located somewhere in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Initially, humans were unable to reproduce on their own, but were later modified with the help of Enki and Ninki. Thus, Adapa was created as a fully functional and independent human being. This modification was made without the approval of Enki's brother Enlil, and a conflict between the gods began. Enlil became man's adversary, and the Sumerian tablet mentions that men served the gods and underwent many hardships and sufferings. The Sumerian civilization. Sumer was first colonized by humans from 4500 to 4000 BC, although it is likely that some settlers arrived much earlier. This primitive population, known as the Ubaid people, were notable for advances in the development of civilization, such as agriculture and livestock, weaving cloth, working with carpentry and pottery, and even drinking beer. Villages and towns were built around Ubaid farming communities. The people known as Sumerians were in control of the area by 3000 BC. Their culture was made up of a group of city-states, including Eridu, Nippur, Lagash, Kish, Uar, and the first true city, Uruk. At its height around 2800 BC, the city had a population of between 40,000 and 80,000 people living within its 6 kilometers of defensive walls, making it a contender for the largest city in the world. Each Sumerian city-state was surrounded by a wall, with villages outside and distinguished by the worship of local deities. Sumerian language and literature. The Sumerian language is the oldest linguistic record. It first appeared in archaeological records around 3100 BC and dominated Mesopotamia for the next 1,000 years. It was mostly replaced by Akkadian around 2000 BC, but remained a written language in cuneiform for another 2000 years. Cuneiform, which is used in pictographic tablets, appeared as early as 4000 BC but was later adapted into Akkadian and expanded further outside Mesopotamia from 3000 BC. Writing remains one of the most important cultural achievements of the Sumerians, allowing for meticulous record-keeping from rulers to farmers and ranchers. The oldest written laws date back to 2400 BC in the city of Ebla, where the Ernama Code was written on tablets. The Sumerians were considered to have a rich body of literary works, although only fragments of these documents exist. Sumerian art and architecture. Large-scale architecture is generally credited with having begun under the Sumerians, with religious structures dating back to 3400 BC, although it appears that the foundations of the structures began in the Ubaid period as early as 5200 BC and were improved over the centuries. The houses were made of mud bricks or marsh reeds. The buildings are known for their arched doors and flat roofs. Elaborate constructions such as terracotta ornamentation with bronze details, intricate mosaics, imposing brick columns, and sophisticated wall paintings reveal the technical sophistication of the society. Sculpture was used primarily to adorn temples and offers some of the earliest examples of human artists seeking to achieve some form of naturalism in their figures. Facing a shortage of stone, the Sumerians made the leap into metal smelting for their carving work, although stone carving in relief was a popular art form. Under the Akkadian dynasty, sculpture reached new heights, as evidenced by the intricate and stylized work in diorite dating to 2100 BC. Ziggurats began to appear around 2200 BC. These impressive stepped pyramid-shaped temples, either square or rectangular, had no inner chambers and were about 170 feet tall. Ziggurats often featured sloping sides and terraced gardens. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon was one of them. Palaces also reach a new level of grandeur. In Mari, around 1779 BC, an ambitious 200-room palace was built. Sumerian science. The Sumerians had a system of medicine based on magic and herbal medicine, but they were also familiar with processes of removing chemical parts from natural substances. They are thought to have had an advanced knowledge of anatomy, and surgical instruments have been found at archaeological sites. One of the greatest advances of the Sumerians was in the area of hydraulic engineering. Early in their history, they created a system of ditches to control floods and were also the inventors of irrigation, harnessing the power of the Tigris and Euphrates for agriculture. Canals were consistently maintained from dynasty to dynasty. His engineering and architectural skills point to the sophistication of his understanding of mathematics. The structure of the modern time, with 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, is attributed to the Sumerians. Sumerian culture. Schools were common in Sumerian culture, marking the world's first mass effort to impart knowledge to keep a society functioning and building on itself. The Sumerians left behind dozens of written records, but are most famous for their epic poetry, which influenced later works in Greece and Rome and sections of the Bible, most notably the story of the Great Flood, the Garden of Eden, and the Tower of Babel. The Sumerians were musically inclined, and a Sumerian hymn, Hurrian Hymn No. 6, is considered the oldest musically notated song in the world. Gilgamesh. The first Sumerian governing body that has historical verification is the First Dynasty of Kish. The first ruler mentioned is Etna of Kish, who, in a document of the time, is credited with having stabilized all the lands. 1,000 years later, Etna would be remembered in a poem that recounted her adventures in heaven. The most famous of the early Sumerian rulers is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, who took control around 2700 BC and is still remembered for his fictional adventures in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first epic poem in history and inspiration for later Roman and Greek myths and Bible stories. A devastating flood in the region was used as the centerpiece of the epic poem and later reused in the story of Noah in the Old Testament. Sumerian power struggles. Around 2600 BC, a power struggle broke out between the leaders of Kish, Erech, and Ur, which set off a scenario of musical chairs of rulers for the region for the next 400 years. The first conflict resulted in the kingdom of Awan taking over and moving the ruling body out of Sumer until the kingship was returned to Kish. The Kish held control briefly until the accession of King Uruk and Shakashana, whose brief dynasty was followed by the Adabian conqueror Lugalanamundu, who held power for 90 years and is said to have expanded his kingdom as far as the Mediterranean. Lugalanamundu also conquered the Akkadian people, who lived in the eastern mountains of Iraq and who would later come to rule Sumer. In 2500 BC, the only woman to rule the Sumerians, Kubaba, assumed the throne. She is the only woman listed on the Sumerian king list, which names all of Sumer's rulers and their accomplishments. Kubaba's son Puzursoon eventually reigned, bringing in the 4th dynasty of Kish after a brief Unzi ancestry, the first in the Akshak dynasty. This last Kish dynasty ruled for a century before King Uruk-Ligulzejasai ruled for 25 years before Sargon took control in 2234. Sargon was an Akkadian whose past is shrouded in legends that some claim were started by Sargon himself. The claim is that he was the secret son of a high priestess who put him in a basket and threw him into a river, a story that was later used for Moses in the Old Testament. Sumerian tradition says that Sargon was the son of a gardener who rose to the office of cupbearer to Uarzababa, king of Kish, who was not a servant but a high official. Uarzababa was defeated by the king of Uruk, who in turn was overtaken by Sargon. Sargon followed this victory by taking the cities of Uar, Amma, and Lagash and establishing himself as ruler. His militaristic reign reached the Persian Gulf. Sargon built the city of Agade as his base, south of Kish, which became an important center of the ancient world and an important port. Agade was also home to Sargon's army, which is considered to be the first organized standing army in history and the first to use chariots in warfare. Sargon took control of the religious cultures of the Akkadians and Sumerians, making his daughter Enheduanna the chief priestess of the moon god cult of Uar. Enheduanna is best remembered for her transcriptions of temple hymns, which she also wrote down and preserved in her writings. Sargon ruled for 50 years, and after his death, his son Rimish faced widespread rebellion and was killed. Rimish's brother Meneshtushu met the same fate. Sargon's grandson Naram-Sin assumed the throne in 2292 BC. Naram-Sin considered himself divine and was accused of sacrilege. The Gutians invaded in 2193 BC after the reign of the last Akkadian king, Naram-Sin's son Sharkalasheri. His era is marked by decentralized chaos and neglect. It was during Gutian's reign that the great city of Agade fell to rubble and disappeared from history. Uar-Nammu. The final breath of Sumerian leadership came in 2100 BC when Utuhigul, king of Uar, overthrew the Gutians. Utuhigul's reign was brief, with Uar-Nammu, the former ruler of Uar, taking the throne, starting a dynasty that would rule for about a century. Uar-Nammu was known as a builder. Figures of the time depict him carrying building materials. During his reign, he initiated massive projects to build walls around his capital, create more irrigation canals, build new temples, and rebuild old ones. Uar-Nammu also did the considerable work of building an organized and complicated legal code that is considered the first in history. His goal was to ensure that everyone in the kingdom, no matter what city they lived in, received the same justice and punishment, rather than depending on the whims of individual governors. Uar-Nammu also created an organized school system for state administrators. Called a Dubba, he kept an archive of clay tablets for learning. What happened to Sumer? In 2004 BC, the Elamites invaded Uar and took control. At the same time, the Amorites began to outnumber the Sumerian population. Elamite rulers were eventually absorbed into Amorite culture, becoming the Babylonians and marking the end of the Sumerians as a body distinct from the rest of Mesopotamia. The Sumerian religion. The Sumerians believed that the universe was ruled by a pantheon formed by a group of living beings, in human form, but immortal and possessing superhuman powers. These beings, they believed, were invisible to mortal eyes and guided and controlled the cosmos according to a pre-established plan and rigorously elaborated laws. The Sumerians had 4 fundamental deities, known as creator gods. These gods were An, god of the sky, Ki, goddess of the earth, Enlil, god of air, and Enki, god of water. Sky, earth, air, and water were considered the 4 most important components of the universe. The gods conceived the set of immutable universal rules and laws, which all beings were obliged to obey, to guarantee the satisfaction of the gods and to prevent chaos from resurfacing. Enki, god of wisdom and water, was considered the creator of the human race. He was worshipped in the holy city of Eridu, which was thought to be the oldest in the world during ancient times. Next in importance to the creator deities were the 3 celestial deities, Nana, god of the moon, Utu, sun god, and Inanna, queen of heaven. Inanna was also goddess of love, procreation, and war. Nanna was the father of Utu and Inanna. Another god of great importance was Ninurta, the deity of the violent and destructive south wind. One of the dearest gods was the shepherd god Dumuzi. Originally, he was a mortal ruler whose marriage to Inanna ensured the fertility of the land and procreative fecundity. Nippur, a holy city built around the banks of the Euphrates River, was dedicated as the sanctuary of Enlil. The name of his ziggurat translates to the house that unites heaven and earth, as it was considered the umbilical cord to the heavenly world. The ziggurat, like the one at Nippur, was a feature of all Sumerian cities. Architecturally, it had a square, pyramid-shaped foundation, each level above the foundation becoming progressively smaller, culminating in a temple at the top. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, however, the ziggurats of ancient Sumer were sacred places of worship. It was even believed that the patron god of the city-state lived inside the temple at the peak of the ziggurat. Tell me here in the comments what you think. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. See you in the next video.